Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for coming out tonight to the Hotıì ts'eeda NWT SPOR support unit meeting on post-secondary. I'm Des Loreen, and I'll be sort of hosting / moderating the event tonight. Tonight we're going to have some presentations, and then there's going to be a Q&A session afterwards where you can have a conversation with the speakers. There will be door prizes drawn at the end of the meeting, so please stick around. And could be you, right? Hey. Okay, so the first up to speak is going to be Stephanie Irlbacher-Fox. We'll have Stephanie up to speak, and then we'll have Denise McDonald and Lesa Semmler as well. And after that, we'll have a Q&A session conversation with the three speakers. So Stephanie, please.
Thank you, Des. So we have a microphone here for the people who are watching the live feed, but we don't have a microphone for you. So we're going to try to speak as loudly as we can, and hopefully you will all be perfectly silent through the whole thing so that everyone can hear. My name is Stephanie Irlbacher-Fox. I am the scientific director of Hotıì ts'eeda. Our name means working together for good health in Gwich'in, because we're hosted by the Gwich'in government. So as a bit of background on myself, I actually grew up here in Inuvik, and I graduated from Samuel Hearne Secondary School. And I went on through probably too much university, as I'm sure Lawrence Norbert would say. And I ended up getting doing a PhD at Cambridge University in England. And since then, I've spent about the last 20 years working mainly for Indigenous governments in the Northwest Territories on things like negotiating self-government agreements. So I've worked in most Indigenous communities in the NWT, in the Inuvik, Gwich'in, and Sachu regions, and some communities in the Decho area as well. In addition to that, I have published a book and other scholarly publications. I have taught courses at Aurora College, and I'm currently leading another research grant in addition to my role with Hotıì ts'eeda. And I do continue to advise Indigenous governments across the NWT on various things. So I have sort of a unique professional life. And it's one that gives me a unique perspective as well as a non-Indigenous person working in the NWT. So I just want to start out by saying thank you to the staff of Hotıì ts'eeda, Amanda Chalk, who works for the Gwich'in Tribal Council here, Julian McLean, who works at the Inuvik Regional Corporation, and our communications advisor, Rachel McNeil, who put together this fabulous presentation for me that I don't have anywhere near the skills to do something like this, so I'm grateful to all of them. Our organization is one of 11 units in Canada. So every province has a unit that is funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. We're the only territorial one. Nunavut and the Yukon haven't set theirs up yet. Our governing council consists mainly of Indigenous governments. So the Inuvik, the Gwich'in, Bottleneck, the Gwich'in government, who hosts us, of course, are all on our governing council, along with the Department of Health and Social Services with GNWT, and the University of Alberta Department of Medicine also has a representative on our council. This is our second year of operations. Our main purpose is really to help get health research done better in the NWT. We're here to connect communities with researchers and to make sure that research is being done in a way basically that's decolonizing and that is supporting Indigenous communities in their cultural resurgence. What this also means is that we also have a fairly broad mandate because, of course, our partners at Hotıì ts'eeda tell us that health is really about everything. It's about wellness, it's about the environment, education, So that's what allows us to have a fairly broad mandate to contribute to public policy discussions like this one. So to get into the focus of tonight's presentation, when we're reflecting on a vision for post-secondary education in the Northwest Territories, the first thing I think we have to think about is, who is this polytechnic for? Who's going to be attending? When we look at Aurora College and who's attending the college now, really who we're talking about are Indigenous students from the NWT. There's a strong pull for them to stay close to home. They have a lot of ties to the land, to family, many reasons to stay in the NWT. There are also non-Indigenous students, a smaller population, whose families have made their homes in the NWT. And lastly, I think we can probably expect, as we see now in the college, a few students from other parts of Canada and other parts around the world. We have a pretty long history in the NWT with Aurora College. I believe it's been 50 years this year, as well as with the kindergarten to grade 12 education system. In our view, at this point, we have a really good handle on what doesn't work. So with colonization, that's when non-Indigenous people first came to the North, started making up laws and rules for the Indigenous people who were originally from here. Schooling systems were also set up. These were mainly residential schools at first, and slowly the federal government and then the government of the Northwest Territories took them over as secular institutions, institutions that didn't have religion mixed into them for the most part. What that resulted in was a school system that was based on the kind of schooling you would see down south. So really it was about colonizers' values brought into institutions in the NWT. So in terms of infrastructure, even today, we see in many small communities in particular, the infrastructure is basically inadequate. It doesn't meet the needs. It may be put in place in accordance with formulas and policies and all sorts of rules that make sense in some places, but are failing the kids in our small communities, particularly outside of Yellowknife. Indigenous people in particular in the NWT have encountered in this system what's known as epistemic violence. And epistemology is a way of knowing. And if you have violence done to that, in this case, it takes the form of that way of knowing Indigenous worldviews either don't matter at all, or they're actively sort of seen and described as less than. And that, of course, is harmful to Indigenous students. Residential schools were all about that. The other thing about colonization in our school system is that it expresses what's known as settler colonialism. So settler colonialism is the set of social relations that issues from colonization. It's a dominant, subordinate situation where settlers, people from away, are dominant at the expense of Indigenous people. So this again means that in our schools, we see a lot of non-Indigenous people in positions of power making decisions about things like what should we teach, how should we teach it. Essentially, in the NWT, what we are seeing now, and I think what we've seen for a long time, is it's almost like there are two different school systems operating. There's a school system in Yellowknife, it's well-resourced, the kids there, about 70% of them are functioning at grade level. We move outside of Yellowknife, and what we have is a system where about 30% of the students are functioning at grade level, 70% are not. So it's almost like the situation is flipped. In Yellowknife, there are great resources, there are full-size gyms, there's local infrastructure in the city, so many teachers that they're able to teach things like yoga and music, computer, drama. At Sir John, you can learn how to become a hairdresser, you can learn aesthetics, you can learn cooking. That's not the case in the communities at all. For me personally, having grown up in Inuvik, we had the basics here in Inuvik. I live in Yellowknife and my two sons go to school in Yellowknife. And I can already see significant differences. I've seen it since they were in kindergarten. They're both in French immersion. They have great resources, wonderful academic programs at the high school. And in some of the small communities, kids can't even really get access to academic courses so that they can graduate and go on to university. There's a crisis happening in the NWT where we have this very stark split between the quality of education in Yellowknife and the quality of education outside of Yellowknife. And in my view, it amounts to a crisis. Within the small communities, another thing that's quite prominent are colonization impacts or social suffering. In small communities, these are much more prominent than we see in the larger centers in the north. And again, that relates to a similar lack of infrastructure, lack of resources across a lot of other programs and services, not just education. But this is basically the reality that about half of our population has to deal with. I don't think that we can talk about a post-secondary vision unless we talk about a renewed vision for K-12. Because the kids in K-12, the kids who are not performing at grade level, that 70%, they're the ones who we somehow expect will go on to enroll at a polytechnic university, which is what the Department of Education is planning on building. So I think what we need to do now is we need to not only vision post-secondary education, which is something that the government of the Northwest Territories is undertaking. I think they also need to take a good hard look at visioning K-12. And in order to do that, we have to get a really solid factual understanding of what's going on. When I was doing research before this talk, I wasn't able to find a lot of facts after the year 2012, 2013 about how our kids are doing. I wasn't able to find evaluations about the renewal that has been going on in K-12 education over the last decade or so. I think those are publicly available, and if they are, that's great, but it's clear that they're not accessible. If we really want to move forward, if we want to build a post-secondary institution that's going to be used, that's going to be useful, and that is going to be one that our own kids in the NWT can access, we need to start with our foundation, and that's K-12. In doing that, there are specific things that we need to look at, and there's alternative ways that we can build a post-secondary vision that actually builds on our strengths. Too often when we're looking at what should we do different, what can we do that's new, it's all about changing people. It's about getting Indigenous people to be more like non-Indigenous people. And that usually necessarily requires ignoring the strengths that we see in Indigenous communities. So at Hotıì ts'eeda, we have a vision where it's more about building on Indigenous strengths, putting at the center of this vision land-based Indigenous cultures. We believe that if we put that at the center of the vision, what we'll see in schools are Indigenous pedagogies, being able to teach in ways that bring in Indigenous ways of learning, Indigenous ways of teaching. We think that the infrastructure will actually be useful. We'll be teaching in ways that require the kind of buildings, the kind of settings on the land in other places that actually will be helpful for kids, or in this case, post-secondary students, to be able to learn well. We also think this will result in the right values and the right people being used to make decisions about what happens in post-secondary education. And finally, a post-secondary vision, we should always be thinking about how is this going to contribute to reciprocity instead of colonization? How is it going to contribute to Indigenous resurgence culturally? How will it help to make communities healthy and well? At Hotıì ts'eeda, we have about a dozen partners of Indigenous communities across the north. And when they and their representatives talk to us, they talk about a future where they want their kids to be well educated. They want their kids to be healthy, and they want to have control over their education. And that is the vision that I think putting land-based Indigenous cultures at the center of a vision can result in. So an NWT Polytechnic in those ways and in many others can be life-changing. And the Polytechnic, although we're advocating for an Indigenous-centered approach, non-Indigenous people will necessarily benefit as well. The same way that non-Indigenous people benefit from land claims and self-government agreements. There will be a lot of different opportunities for non-Indigenous people and Indigenous people, for all people in the NWT, whether it's jobs for highly qualified personnel, better physical infrastructure throughout different communities in the NWT, not just Yellowknife, providing different programs, organizations, and individuals with institutional affiliations so that they can access federal research funding, which right now is not coming to the NWT. As well, the Polytechnic can provide support to fledgling organizations that are focused on research. Currently, there's a number of these, and they struggle. They can get the money to do their programs, they can't get the money to do their governance properly, to hire someone to keep the books, to keep the lights on. These are things that a Polytechnic infrastructure could provide. It would also provide networking. This Polytechnic could be a place of real strength. It could be a place where like-minded people come together and where people who are focused on different types of things can network and realize that they have more in common and that they can partner together towards achieving a vision. Right now, within the NWT knowledge economy, there are a lot of different organizations who are working on training, on research, on knowledge translation. They're out there doing their thing, and a lot of them have actually developed on their own as independent organizations because there is no university. There are also Southern universities who have established offices, at least in Yellowknife, and who could potentially be establishing offices in other communities in the NWT. They could be affiliated with the Polytechnic. Similarly, institutes like the Gwich'in Research and Training Institute, the Gwich'in Heritage Division, these are programs that have done a lot of really amazing work. And if there were a university in the NWT, they would probably be working with that university, and they would be able to leverage what the university has to do even more than they are now. There are independent skill development organizations like the Mine Training Society. This is a perfect example of a program that could easily be affiliated with the Polytechnic University. Similarly, organizations like ts'eeda, the Collège Nordique, and even Hotıì ts'eeda. These are organizations as well that normally they would be affiliated within universities in the South, but in the Northwest Territories have necessarily developed on their own. And these are just more examples. And these are examples of organizations that really could be ones that are developed outside of Yellowknife. So the Northern Farm Training Institute is a perfect example of what a campus in Hay River could be built around, an existing strength. So another important element of Polytechnic in the NWT is that it would contribute towards anchoring what's known as the knowledge economy. So overall, of course, a Polytechnic would provide capacity and training initiatives as well as professional development for NWT residents. And what that could do is help to create sustainability. A knowledge economy is not something that the government of the Northwest Territories has focused on until very recently. And that's okay. They're going in the right direction by talking about developing a knowledge economy strategy. Having local and sustainable economic options for people is especially important at a time where sectors like the mining sector are not doing as well. By having a polytechnic functioning in the NWT, it would be training highly qualified community members and leveraging the strengths that already exist within communities. It could result in a lot more knowledge translation happening, so taking knowledge, taking research results, and getting those into the hands of policymakers. Right now, we tend to have a model in the NWT where researchers come in, do their research, hand over a report sometimes, and then leave again. With a better focus on knowledge translation, we would be looking at devoting resources to making sure that if good research is done and it can improve people's lives, that it gets in to change policy within government and other organizations. And finally, of course, the Polytechnic could promote Indigenous pedagogies and epistemologies as well, as I mentioned earlier. The overarching result of this is that if we can get an amazing Polytechnic University model up and running, ultimately it would contribute to healthier communities, more sustainable economically and socially. So how do we get there? Really, in a nutshell, there's 4 sort of key steps to this process. And the first one, and I think probably the most important one, is to strengthen our foundation. We can't really think about building a polytechnic university if we don't have a K-12 system that can produce high rates of graduates who actually have their grade 12. Outside of Yellowknife, this isn't happening now. We have to change the system where we have only one K-12 system in the Northwest Territories, where the performance statistics of students are similar across the board, no matter which community people live in the NWT. Second is we need to foster our innovators. There are a lot of individuals who have built organizations in the knowledge economy. So these are things like Gwich'in, the Farm Training Institute, Hotıì, Foxy. There are people who have ideas, who are capable, and they can create things. Those are the people that we need to support. So when we talk about Polytechnic University being related to these organizations, we're not talking about them taking them over. We're talking about this Polytechnic supporting them, letting creative people do what they do best, and making sure that they're doing the programs instead of worrying about the money, worrying about the administration. We really need to build on our strengths. So if we want a polytechnic that is going to be for the whole NWT, that's going to work for everyone in the NWT, we need to build on Indigenous strengths. And we need Indigenous governments and Indigenous people to identify what are those strengths. How do we want to see them expressed? How do we want to see those built on? And the direction should be taken from them. Finally, the government of the Northwest Territories will have to step back and let this grow. They will have to get out of the way. So government is there to provide the money. Government is there to provide a legislative framework. Government is there to track what's happening so that they know if they're going to put more money into something, they actually know what's going on. No matter how good or bad that picture might be, if we are not tracking the data, if we don't know how much research funding we have in the NWT from external sources and where it's being spent, if we don't know how many jobs are being created by research funding, if we don't know how many students are graduating and why or why not, if we're not upfront and honest and facing hard facts about these things, we're not able to build something that will actually work. So instead of trying to do this polytechnic for the NWT, the government of the Northwest Territories needs to support its development and has to allow it to be independent and to build on the strengths of the people and the creativity and the ideas and the cultures of all of the communities and the organizations that we have in the Northwest Territories. So basically to just get out of the way and let this grow. And with that, I'll say thank you very much and turn it over to Denise.
Thank you, Stephanie. I apologize if I'm not loud enough. I have a bit of a throat issue right now. So welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. My name is Denise McDonald. Born in Aklavik, raised in Inuvik. I attended SAM School, Samuel Hearn Secondary School. I'm a graduate of Aurora College. I also have a Bachelor of Education degree from Saskatchewan and a Master of Education degree from the University of Alberta. I've been involved in education since the early 1980s, first as a teacher, school administrator, ECE consultant, superintendent. I was a past member of the Board of Governors for Aurora College. I'm currently an Aurora College on the Research Ethics Committee, adjunct faculty at the School of Public Health with the University of Alberta. I work with the Institute of Circumpolar Health Research as well as Hotıì ts'eeda part-time. I'm also a member of the Adjudication Committee Association of Canadian Universities for Northern Students, and I'm retired. Thank you. I have a vision for post-secondary education in the NWT, and it really centers around my home territory, the Beaufort Delta. This is an excellent time for the GNWT to step back and consider the vision for post-secondary education in the NWT. I have hope and trust that the view of Northerners will be considered with sincerity. Post-secondary education in the North is first and foremost for Northerners. Education of our Northern students begins with primary, elementary, and secondary education. While there is some success, there is still much to be done to support our families and prepare our students from a very young age. We know of all the challenges in our school system today, junior kindergarten to grade 12. We know that we can work hard from an educational perspective to improve the quality of education. We also know that our families and our students require a lot of support. We know that there's a lot of poverty, there's housing issues, there are mental health issues, there are all kinds of challenges that our families and our people need considerable support with. I would like to go right to secondary education because I really believe that the whole education system, K to 12, is worthy of a separate kind of dialogue because there needs to be so much improvement, and there are ways that the education system is working for Northern students in small communities, such as e-learning. So there's a lot of good things happening, but there's still, as I said, a lot of challenges. In considering secondary or high school education, I would recommend students decide at a grade 10 level, about 16 years of age, what their areas of study will be in post-secondary, and work with career counselors and educators to ensure that they are prepared to enter into the program of their choice. This may be trades, arts, journalism, sciences, or other such programs. Completing high school does not always have to take 3 years. It's okay to take 4, or in some cases 5, to complete the required courses. Further, not all Northern students choose the academic streams. Many are focused on gaining other skills such as the trades. Many universities and colleges in the South have implemented a bridging or transitional year for those that require upgrading. This doesn't only happen in the North, it also happens in Southern post-secondary institutions. Perhaps our education system requires an agreement or transitional year in which adult students are fully funded to complete this year. I understand a foundational review report of Aurora College was released in May of last year. The review report recommends that the transformation of Aurora College into a Northern Canada Polytechnic University. While Yellowknife may seem the ideal location to some, I would advise the GNWT to carefully consider the location. There are strengths in other communities and regions, and of course I would advocate for Inuvik in the Beaufort Delta as headquarters with campuses in Yellowknife, Fort Smith, and Hotıì River. Each region has their program areas of strength, which have been developed over many years. They can all continue with some of the programs they are currently delivering. Our reviewers need to examine closely what is working and what isn't. We are always considering meeting labor market demands in the NWT in developing our academic and vocational programming. We must also consider what our Earth and future generations need in terms of natural environment, clean water, clean air, and sustenance. While our Northern students are gaining valuable skills and knowledge, in the Beaufort Delta we have a unique opportunity to develop programs in the areas of environmental sciences, climate change, renewable resources, traditional knowledge, land-based Northern programs on governance, history, treaty rights, land claims, etc. Consider traditional medicines and midwifery, trauma training for counselors, along with nursing. Other areas I would recommend: language and linguistics, fine arts, blending contemporary and traditional arts of the people who have developed unique and amazing skills over thousands of years. Imagine metal and bone work, carving, moose hide tanning, beading, painting, tapestry making, porcupine quill, and moose hair tufting brought to another level. Music, contemporary and traditional, tourism programs, wellness, and research. As we build on the needs of Northern students, we should also look globally. If consideration is given to rebuilding an institution where Northerners can reach their full academic potential, let's also invite students from the rest of Canada and throughout the world to study in Canada's Northwest Territories. Our world today is highly technological, fast-paced, and competitive. The North can keep up. I advocate for the strengths of the Beaufort Delta, with the Inuvik and Gwich'in cultures, an ocean, mountains, lakes, river, and an amazing landscape where studies can take place. Currently, there's much interest from around the world in the Arctic. Environment and climate change. There are local people with knowledge of the natural environment, the land, waters, animals, fish, and birds. There is also a need to research and develop researchers. Many students would be interested in experiencing the Arctic, the culture, the 24-hour sunlight, and the darkness in the winter. This is an experience for people. If this is to be truly a Northern college or university, it is time to review and consider the vision. Include the strengths of the Indigenous people who have been here, thrived, and continue to make this their permanent home. Include their views, their knowledge, skills, and ideas, and work with them. Aim higher. Imagine how the GNWT can and should assist in building post-secondary education programming that will not only attract more Northerners, but also the rest of the world. Masi.
I don't have such a long resume. So my name is Lesa Semmler, and I am the Inuvik Health Systems Navigator. I'm a registered nurse by trade. I've grown up in the Northwest Territories. I'm Inuvik myself. I've gone through SAM school, and I've gone through SHSS, and I've graduated, and it took me a lot longer, so I'm one of the norm for the Northwest Territories of the majority of the students that take a little bit longer, but that has never kind of kept me down, and just keep moving forward. I've also had, my oldest has graduated and gone through the whole school system here in Inuvik, and I have a 15-year-old who's just hitting she's middle of grade 9. So I've also, with my nursing, I was trained in Yellowknife at the Aurora College. So my whole school curriculum and success has been in the North. I am on the governing council for Hotıì, ts'eeda, and my perspective on the vision is coming from an Inuvik resident, parent, all that, kind of bringing that to the table. So the vision for post-secondary education, and it kind of reflects a lot of what's been said, is we must identify who we are designing this for. We want to be able to create the jobs for the territories, for our people, who then we can consider as role models. Our children do not see ourselves in the people that we grow up around that are in the teaching positions, the nursing positions. You go to a majority of the places where people are working in the government offices, and we do not see ourselves. So I think that's where we need to look at, when we look at a polytechnic, we need to be able to create a local program for these positions. But we also want to bring Canada in. As per some of the stuff that we talk about, I have to bring it back to the K-12. That is where I have my most experience, because as previous chair of the BDEC and as previous chair of the Inuvik District Education Authority, the things that we see are to prepare us for a post-secondary. We don't even have the capacity, is what I'm saying, in some of our students, and which is disheartening when you look at exams and things that we show through a lot of the statistics that we've started to track, and IRC has implemented a lot of tracking of grades of the ISR, which is the Inuvik Settlement Region, and we see our grade 6s, when we look at them compared to the rest of the Northwest Territories, they're at a 60%, and then when they hit grade 9, they're at a 30%. You know, like, we're seeing that shift where we're saying Yellowknife is 70-30, and in the communities we're starting to see the opposite. How do we even start to think post-secondary? Some of the IRC's perspective and my own, we know that since I've been in school, one of the things that I can speak to is always striving. You're always striving for that good grade because you don't want to be left behind. You want to keep up with your peers. In the Inuvik region, and a lot of the family members, they don't understand inclusive schooling. And to myself, I tried to understand, and I tried to support it as on the BDEC, when I was on BDEC, and it's been 30 years. It's not helping. So we don't see an improvement. Either we're not able to run it successfully because of the distance between our regional centers and our communities, the capacity in our communities to bring those levels up, but we're not seeing it. And so what our families are saying is, we don't want this. We want our kids to be able to strive because we know they can. There's been some, we have some questionnaires that we sent out with the kids. So we have some stats, and some of the stats from IRC is some of the questions coming back from the high school kids are, you know, like about working and striving, and they come back with their comments to say that they don't have to try because they're being moved to the next grade and they know this. They've learned the system. So, and I'm being a parent myself, I know I'm struggling hard because I get that. Well, I don't have to go because I'm going to pass anyway. But what we're seeing now is the bottleneck. What we always say is the grade 10 bottleneck. And this is where once they hit the Alberta curriculum, we see going from 50 students moving along and then 100 students in grade 10, because the ones that have been moved along throughout the years are unable to achieve those grades to continue to move on and after not being able to move on and without that success, we usually lose them. So when we look at the averages, and I just can take Inuvik for example, in kindergarten we might start with an average of 60 to 65 students. Our average graduating class is usually around 20. So we're losing 2/3 of our graduates along the way. And that's people moving and coming and going, but we still usually average. So those are some of the things that I think we have to really look at when we're visioning for post-secondary, is we really have to revision our K to 12. And so moving forward into post-secondary, I think what we need to do is who we're targeting. We're targeting Northerners. We all come from small communities. I left Inuvik, which is not a small community, to go to Yellowknife. It was very difficult, you know, and that's the thing is this is from my personal experience going from a small community into a larger community. The supports that you have are not there. The family supports, you know, childcare, and a majority of our families our students start families younger. So we're having to look at the family as a whole, as a student. So how do we support this young family to be able to continue their education, to be able to be successful in post-secondary? And this is where I think visioning needs to look at some of the ways that we as people here, you know, it's hard for us to look at a 4-year program and say, am I ever going to make it? I've got 3 kids or I've got 2 kids, you know, am I ever going to hit that? But if we were to be able to structure our post-secondary, so where, like, I think, and my background is health, so when I think of health, I think of the statistics that we've heard in the past, like year or two, of our elders. We have so many elders that our population of elders is increasing, but our beds for long-term care isn't increasing. But as Indigenous people, we don't want our elders going into homes. We want to be able to take care of them longer at home. So how can we do that in small communities? Is building these programs so that way our people are being able to take the training, but not having to leave home. So a lot of more mentorship kind of type programming, a lot of distance learnings for these programs. Because if we can do it for e-learning in high school for certain programs, why can't we do it through this Polytechnic University where we have classrooms, satellite classrooms, and we can bring them in together to do like smaller periods of time? And I think with our people, like with our families in their communities, being closer to their family, being supported, then we may be more successful. When we look at a 4-year, like I look at nursing, for instance. So with the first year, if you're going into a 4-year program, but stuff happens and we have to go home, or, you know, but we could make it to the end of the first year, and then maybe we can leave that program with a personal support worker or a health support worker, a community health support worker certificate. Then, you know, maybe we deal with what we have to deal with and we decide to come back to school a year or 2 later. We can continue on, and maybe after year 2 or year 3, we have a smaller time frame, we can become a practical nurse. How do we envision that? How do we fit that into our government system where you can go back to your communities. Those are some of the things we have to partner with health to figure that out. And then continuing on and having your Bachelor of Science of Nursing. And that can go with environment, like Denise talked about. We have the Environmental Natural Resource Program, but when you look at it, it's a diploma. So how do we, like we have a lot of young people and we have a lot of people who have their diploma, but what if they want to specialize in forestry and they want to specialize in mining and they want to specialize in this? Why that needs to be able to, once you're done your diploma in your home, can you do these distance? Can you do these, like, I think we have to really look at closing that gap of distance. And so keeping our people at home will be more successful, but we still have to put those supports, just like we do with e-learning, where there's people in the communities, wherever those classrooms are, that can support the learning after the lesson is done. So, and then once these are done, I think a vital important thing is a lot of our people like do not get into the jobs right away. So we need to really highlight these partnerships with GNWT. If these are the jobs that we're striving them for, then mentorship partnerships at the end, preceptor partnerships at the end, so that they're comfortable working into that job and they're moving right into the workforce as soon as they're done. So I think those are some of the linkages with post-secondary visions that I see would be more successful. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, great. Once again, everybody, for our presenters tonight. So we're going to have a Q&A session now, and we'll open up the floor to the public. If you have any questions to ask, please go ahead. Yes, or visions. Share your visions with the presenters. Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. Presentations. So one of the challenges, it seems like, with Northern education is the influx of Southerners who've taught and don't have understanding of the culture, etc. So do you have any ideas around hiring strategies for the Polytechnic that would help to ensure that people who are hired are from the North or rooted in the North and are not bringing the same problems to the Polytechnic that we saw with influxes of Southerners in elementary education?
Within the school system, K to 12, every year we did a huge cultural orientation, and we continued that throughout the year, and we encouraged that in their professional development. So I think each year we had to build. We started out with the histories of the people, and we went into things such issues as residential schools and trauma, and coming back full circle to where we want to be. And of course the challenge is the high turnover that we have, because we want to be able to build on it each year, but it's always been very difficult because we have such a high turnover rate. So, but I think we can't give up. For me, that's one of the ways is to do a very strong cultural orientation. Some of our communities work with community members that act as their mentors, people that have been there for long periods of time. And we have a community like Aklavik, where families adopt new teachers coming in from the south, and they give them the experiences on the land. They invite them to their homes, they take them to feasts, and they have dinner with them, and they talk to them about their people and their culture. So those are some ways that I can think of.
I would just want to add that I think there's so many people who could be teaching at a Polytechnic, and they're not, because it doesn't exist. I think if we have an Indigenous culture, land-based culture at the center as a value, people like Denise, she has a master's in education. There are quite a number of Indigenous people from the NWT with masters or bachelors with lots of experience. if the programs existed for them to teach in, I think they would be teaching or teaching part-time. There's also a lot of Indigenous knowledge holders. So those are people as well who, you know, often in communities you go and you say our elders have a PhD in our culture and our language. And that's absolutely true. These are people who have knowledge really that nobody else does. They're experts. And I think those people, if we did this right, and if we offered the kinds of programs that valued that knowledge, that those would be people who would be able to contribute, not just at headquarters in Yellowknife, if that's where it's built, or in Inuvik, if it's built in Inuvik, but being able to be resident in their communities or go on the land and offer those sorts of you know, different programs there. And that's a really good question. Thank you.
I have a little bit of a different vision. Like for I think for all government employees, no matter where you're living, there should, like, we all need to have, because there's still people that just don't realize, like when we look at our students, when you're looking at an adult student in your polytech, you don't realize the impacts that they have lived through, because, and so when they're struggling, it's not struggling with the school work usually. You know, if they've made it there, it's not the school work, it's everything else that they live through when they go home and they leave school. So there needs to be more of an understanding of the demographics of the class. Like, you're not going to get fresh out of high school students, you're going to get families, you're going to get mothers, you're going to get fathers, you're going to get single mothers, you're going to get families who have horrible home lives that are sitting in your classroom trying to get out of that cycle. And I think that's one of the things that within the curriculum, it's where you're living should be, you should be getting taught your education for, like, how do you say it? So if you're in the Beaufort Delta, IRC and Tribal Council should be having an orientation for you as new employees. It shouldn't be built into the government, and the government creating that culture awareness course. It should be, we have a 2-day course and we want everyone coming into our communities to take this course, or even if it's a week long, because you need to go on the land and you need to see what makes us, because it's like I always say with the kids, when we take them out on the land, when they're in school, they may be looked at as troublemakers or the students that are struggling. You take them on the land and you will never have to worry, because they will take care of you and they will show their strengths. So that's why I think it's important that Aboriginal, wherever you are in the territories, if you're in Hay River and you have the cultures there and you're teaching those, or, you know, and I think that's what's important. And I think that's how we're going to overcome some of that.
Excellent. Anybody else? Questions? Scanning the room here, seeing a lot of hands. No? So just to touch on Yellowknife being the center for Polytechnic, what sort of reasons do you have to support? Why do you think it should be in Yellowknife, or why or why not?
I'll start with you. I wonder if there has to be a headquarters. I know that there has to be someone in charge. I know that there probably would be a good thing if there's an independent board of governors. I wonder if there needs to be one campus that's bigger or better than the rest. I don't think it has to be that way, and I think that's a waste of resources. And I think that we're kind of, I mean, it's 2019. I think we're getting a little bit past hierarchy, and that having hierarchies is the way that we have to do everything. I think it would serve the people in the territory to be a bit more egalitarian, and from the outset decide that if we're putting resources into this, those resources should be shared equitably. And for example, what we've seen with the college is that politicians didn't want to build a purpose-built campus there. There's a beautiful campus in Inuvik, there's a beautiful campus in Fort Smith. There are a lot of PhDs and highly qualified Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Yellowknife, and they don't really have a place where they can contribute. So I think it's silly not to leverage what Yellowknife has. I also think it's silly to think that we should put more of the resources into one place when really it could be distributed to leverage from across the NWT.
I can live with that. So long as not more of the resources end up going to Yellowknife, which is often the case, and because it's easily accessible, it's got more accommodations and resources for the students. Again, it'll end up being the hub, and we are left on the sidelines once again. So that's why I advocate for Inuvik as a head office, but I can live without a head office if it's going to be, if all the resources are going to be distributed equally.
I agree. I think that we have to look at it as what's best for the students, not always what's best for the teachers, you know, because we tend to do that. We tend to fall into that colonialism where we have to fall under all these things because it's best for the instructors. But then we're seeing it's not working for our people that live in the Northwest Territories. So having it spread out and being able to bring, like we were saying, in Inuvik, this is what we could grow and be exceptional, like be way above the mark with Indigenous and on the land and tourism and things like that, then let's have that here. And Yellowknife can grow on what it's got and vice versa. But we also have to think about our small communities, because we tend to talk about the 4 regions and then we leave out the other 29 communities that need to grow as well. So
anybody else? Questions? And keep asking if nobody else does here. Anybody else? So now, just while we're talking about the small communities and things, a lot of people are saying, like you said, spread the resources around. So what sort of benefits do you see the Polytechnic having for some of the smaller communities if it would be based there?
I think so. I think of examples like research. So a lot of researchers show up in the summer to do research. Some of them have not much money. Some of them have lots of money, and they have research programs over a number of years. And they employ people. They employ local people to help them do research, whether that's just guiding them around or actually asking questions or helping them collect data. Generally, local people are hired. And oftentimes the people who are in small communities and they're helping researchers, they're always sort of at the low end. They're doing very basic jobs because they don't have access to programs that could actually train them and sort of bring them up the chain in terms of being more involved in the research, being more involved in the direction of the research, being involved in the analysis of the research. Good researchers who work with communities repeatedly will find young people in those communities and take them back and say, come to this university, I will be your supervisor, I will help you succeed. You know, I went to university in England, and the department I was in, they did a lot of work in Russia. And there were so many Indigenous students from Siberia in my department, because anthropologists who went there would meet them and they would encourage them and say, I'm going to make sure that you can come back and get a university education. And I don't think we see that with researchers here, in part because there's no expectation of that. And so I think we need to start putting expectations on researchers. I think if there were programs available through a polytechnic, we are training local people to do more in relation to research with researchers. That would create a pathway for people to get an education, or it would also create a pathway for people to be on the land more as well. So I think there's a potential for win-win and for people to developing their skills in relation to the land, as well as potentially creating a pathway to university.
I'll just expand on the idea of research a little bit more. I think the benefit it could have to some of our small communities and regions is that, first of all, I think that education is very close. I know that education is very closely connected to the health of our people. It's everything. we cannot have well-educated people if we don't have healthy communities and families. So we have a lot of health kinds of challenges in the north, and it could be everything from mental health to sexual health amongst young people, or it could be the other areas in diabetes and in heart disease, or it could be accessing water, fresh water, or these types of things. I think some of our communities could start directing and should start directing what kind of research they want done in their communities and work alongside the researchers as equal partners. So they develop the process and they come out with their own answers, and from there they can work through their some of their challenges in their communities. So I think that's one of the benefits of working in small communities.
Lesa.
It goes back to again where I said if they're able to stay in their communities and take the training, then they'd be more successful, which they could do the jobs in the community. Like there's, when you look at a small community, there's not a lot of jobs, but the jobs that there are usually filled by a non-Indigenous person. So by being able to be, to take these courses, because, it's like some people I've known, they've taken their nursing program online, correspondently, so why is it not okay to be able to support these people to do this in their community? So that way they can become and mentor them while they're doing it in the health centers, so that they can come out of there and be the health center nurse, or do a lot of the training on the job. We've all, as Indigenous people, we've learned through many years of mentorship, and when you think back of midwifery and things like that, that was passed down from generation to generation through mentorship. It was never a school, and so having these built into the facilities that we have now that people are training, I learned more on the job than I ever did sitting in the classroom as a nurse. When I actually did my mentorship is where I learned to be that specialist nurse in the labor and delivery room. Once I got on the job to be a public health nurse, that's where I got to learn to be that. Even being a manager, training on the job, taking the management training to be a manager of nursing, I learned on the job. And I didn't see myself as those until I actually was supported through a mentorship, supported on the job to learn. So I think that's the one thing that people have to understand with Indigenous people is we learn a lot by mentorship and not sitting in a classroom. That's really hard for Indigenous people. We're not closed space people.
Thanks. Anybody else? Yes, Steve.
I guess I can bring forward some perspective as well. I'm like Lesa and Denise and Stephanie. I born here, grew up here, went to SAMS, went to SHSS, and then I went out to university afterwards and got a Bachelor of Science down in Edmonton. And almost by accident, I guess, ended up coming home. And one thing that I've sort of observed, having gone through all that, is I share, I guess, some of Lesa's stated confusion over the whole issue of inclusive schooling or social passing, whatever you call it. I'm personally of the opinion I think it's a total failure for what it's been trying to achieve. One of the things I think it has largely done is killed any work ethic in a lot of the kids that are here, because, as Lesa said, they know the system, they know they don't have to do any work, and they're still going to get pushed ahead. And I have some children in my own household who have struggled academically and just get moved along and moved along and moved along. And once they get out of that school or that system, how are they going to know how to have that work ethic in order to strive to get something, do something better? I know there's been a lot of talk in the past over the years of a lot of people moving away You know, they bring their kids up, they get some great northern experience, they get to do some cool stuff here. And then as soon as their kids start getting around that grade 5, grade 6 level, they say, you know what, the school here is not good. It's not as good as down south. I'm leaving. So they pick up their families and they go. But in my experience at the time that I went through school in the 80s and 90s, when I actually left the university, having gone through all my schooling here, I did not struggle academically in my first year, except for some of the courses that we did not offer here, like calculus and linear algebra and some of the fancy math and statistics. Those are just courses that weren't offered here, so we had no experience with it compared to some of the students from the South who did have those programs offered in their high schools. But, you know, chemistry, biology, English, all those things, really the first semester seemed a lot like review from what I had been learning in grade 12 the year before. So academically, I thought our school system was, you know, doing relatively well. We seem to have somehow moved away where now kids grade 12, but, you know, they don't really have grade 12. And they go to college and they have to do a year of upgrading, or they go to college down south and they have to do a year of upgrading just to get to the level for entry. So again, I think a lot of that to me comes back to a lack of work ethic. Because when you get out, and I tell my kids at home this, if you leave home and you go to university or college, you don't get homework. You give a lot of assignments and you get things that are told that you're supposed to do. You know, you don't have anything to hand in. You don't have to prove that you've done the work. But come the time you have to write the exam, if you haven't done that work, you're going to fail, almost guaranteed. And Lisa's husband, Joseph, here was in our group too. I think we had a really good benefit of the peer group that we grew up around with, where, you know, we probably didn't like to admit it, but there's always a lot of competition between us, academically, you know, in sports and doing other stuff. And we really pushed each other. And I think we elevated each other up quite a lot through that. We wanted better. We wanted to be better, to be able to say, hey, you know, I beat you in that 5-kilometer run, or hey, I got 89, you only got 88, haha. So I think that was a huge benefit to us as well. And I don't know if that was something unique in our circumstance, but I don't imagine so. But in my other role as a coach of the sport, I tried to develop as well. The kids around here don't have as much opportunity. However, they do have the skill to be just as good as anybody else who lives in the big cities. And I tried to develop what I call the culture of excellence. You have to want to be the best at what you're doing, or you have to at least want to be very good at it. And if you have that desire, you're going to have that work ethic internally to push yourself to do well and to work hard to achieve a goal that you set. And, you know, looking at a lot of kids these days, including some of my own, they don't really have a lot of goals. They don't really have a lot of hard work ethic. They kind of just coasting along, and they don't really know what they want to do. And, you know, there are kids that were in my age group that were like that too. They don't know what they want to do. Even that is okay to a certain degree, as long as you sort of keep trying to move yourself forward. And I've told my kids, you know, do you want to go to college? Well, maybe yeah, kind of, but I don't really know what I want to do. And I just tell them, you don't have to know what you want to do. There are so many things that when you get to college and university, you had no idea even existed, that you don't take in high school, like sociology, like anthropology, like chemical engineering, civil engineering, theater design, you know, fine art, piano lessons, English literature. We don't do a lot of that stuff here, and a lot of our high school kids don't either. So when you get to those areas where those opportunities exist, you don't really even know what a lot of that stuff is. So I've told my kids many times, don't feel bad if you don't know what you want to do. Just go into general studies and just take a whole bunch of everything and see what sticks, and see where it takes you. But I think there's not a lot of push for our kids to do that. Get out there and just try things, and don't worry about failing. Not a big deal. You know, you just pick up, dust off, keep going on to something else, and you try something until you find what you like. And lost my train of thought there. So I think back in the time when we were in school too, again, you have to work to pass. Because if you didn't pass, then you stuck behind, and all your friends moved ahead of you. So there was a lot of pressure that way too on a kid, and it gave you a lot of the drive to move forward. And there were times when some kids fell behind and they would get 3 or 4 years behind, and then they would be jumped ahead a few grades to kind of catch up to their peer group. And a lot of those guys were the people who struggled with that academic style of learning. However, they went into more vocational programs. They really excelled when they learned about small engine repair. When they did those are more of the hands-on type of stuff. And we don't have that stream as much anymore, I think, as we used to in the past. Because there are a lot of kids who just they're not book smart, but they're, life smart. They can figure things out. They can get their hands on it. They can sink their fingers into it. They can see someone doing something, or they can't read a book and know how to do it, but if someone shows them how to do it once, they'll know how to do it forever. And I'm a bit like that too. I learn a lot better when someone shows me how to do something. If I struggle to figure it out reading it, something I got to read it 100 times to figure out what to do. But if someone shows you once, who knows what they're doing, then it's very easy to learn. And I don't think we have a lot of that opportunity for people as well. But my vision would be, again, just to develop this culture of excellence in terminology. We want our community to do well. We want our outlying communities to do well. We want the kids to do well. We need the parents and the other community members to also buy into that culture and say, why can't we have the best? Why can't we be really good at these things? There's nothing wrong with us. We're no different than all the people who live in all these other places that do all these amazing things. Costs are higher here. Yes, that's recognized. And for some of those reasons too, I think there's that general sense of malaise and apathy. And I've seen a lot of people and some of my friends and extended family who don't put a lot of importance into the whole idea of getting educated. And that's a struggle. To make people realize that it is important and it's very valuable to have that education in your back pocket at some point down the road. So when their kids don't want to go to school, they're not pushing them out the door saying, get your butt in there. They say, okay, just stay home and sleep, whatever. So there has to sort of be this buildup of this idea that we want to be really good. We want in this region and in this territory. Getting to the whole idea of the Polytechnic University, I think it's a good direction. However, I think if you get to this idea of being headquartered somewhere, if it's headquartered in Yellowknife, it will fail to meet its objectives. I can almost guarantee that. It will not achieve what it's trying to achieve. Because again, you're centralizing all of the resources into one area and everyone else is losing it. Even though they may think they're trying to help everybody, the reality is most of the times it just is not workable in other communities and other regions because they're all different for different reasons. The way people do things are different. The cultures are different. People's approaches to things are different. So the idea of decentralizing and maybe not having headquarters but equal spread resources, sure, that may be a way to do it. Otherwise, I think one of the things about getting outside Yellowknife as well is they're a small city, but they don't have that small town mentality. And I don't think they really understand a lot of the time what will and won't work in these smaller communities. Even though they think they do, they often don't really understand, and they've proved it many times. Another big thing about Yellowknife that I found in my other work environment is they don't have a really good understanding of land claims and how land claims work and what they mean to the region, and also the power that comes with the institutions created by them. That was one thing I really noticed doing some work in the legislature. Is the MLAs and stuff around Yellowknife and the people who worked as bureaucrats, they don't have any settled land claims down there right now. They're being worked on, but they're not settled. Around here, we've been settled for over 30 years for Gallo, and approaching 30 years for the Gwich'in, and close to that for the Hotıì as well. There's very well-established institutions and very well-established ways of that things are done, and they just don't get it, and they don't realize the authorities that a lot of these organizations and boards have in these regions. So that's another big reason why I think a lot of things they try to do don't work out very well outside of that center. So I've talked for a while and said a few things, but I just want to throw a few things out there and put some ideas out as well. And just let people know, the kids that come up through the system here, they can make it. They can do it. Oh, I was going to say, one of the other big struggles we do have is the kids who do get out and go to college and university. One of the big problems we also have is getting them back. We're lucky if we get 50% of them that actually move back to the north. Sometimes it's because whatever field of study they took, there's no jobs here for that. Some of them, when they get out and they get into the city and they experience that, and you get into university and the culture of knowledge and learning and, you know, trying to do all this cool stuff is there. It's a really neat place to be. They don't feel that that exists when at home. Again, this culture of excellence is not really well established here. So, you know, they feel more comfortable in those areas where they're pushing for innovative ideas and solutions to things. And there's a lot of opportunity to be on the forefront of technology and you know, whatever field you're in, to be at the forefront of whatever field you're working in. So we can push people to and create the culture to want people to go and do all this, but we have to also work really hard to want them to come back. You can train a lot of nurses for Inuvik, but
you still don't have them at the
still don't have
hospital.
the hospital. There are a lot of students here who've gone through nursing, but a lot of them aren't here. And they're going to the communities. And again, you have people who are in the job there already, and they may not be retiring for 20 more years. So the jobs just aren't always there. So that's another sort of struggle. It's people are going to go where the jobs are. So trying to pull people back is another issue of how can we create this environment. And I think when you build up, again, keep coming back to this culture of excellence, when you see that, hey, people here really want to do great things, that's exciting. People want to come back and be a part of that. So you've got to get rid of that sort of sense of apathy and malaise that's sort of settled in a lot of places. And try to build it up to where people want to be the best, want to be good at, or very good at something. So just a few thoughts.
You got 2 more minutes, Steve. You want anything else to say?
My wife tells me I talk too much.
I'll just make a few comments. Thank you for those your comments. I think they're really good. I would like to go back to inclusive schooling. No, I wouldn't. I think it serves the purpose. We, like many other school jurisdictions, we do have students that are cognitively delayed, and we have to accommodate them. However, I think that there are lots of areas where we are accommodating students too much, and we need to work with that. There are other areas such as reduced instructional time of teachers in the past few years. The policies and legislation that have come in, I was very, very surprised that we didn't get an uproar from parents such as yourself into these things, because it really takes a political will to change. And it's very difficult to make change once you're inside the system, although you can see these things. So I think it's, you know, election time is coming up. These are good questions. Let's talk about inclusive schooling. Let's talk about instructional hours. Our students are already behind. So what are we going to do? We're going to reduce the time that they're in school interacting with their peers, with their teachers. So I really think those are really good comments, and you shouldn't let them go, because we need our parents, we need our Indigenous groups, we need our DEAs to come back and fight for the students, because it takes change in policy and legislation. Thanks.
I agree with you. And I think just adding to that, it also, just stemming from what you said, changing the thought of what education means to Indigenous people. You know, we're still working with families that have residential school impacts thriving throughout the homes, right? So there's still, I mean, I can still identify being assaulted in our high school, you know, and by a teacher. And at the time, it was never, I was just a bad student and mouthing off, and they were allowed, no repercussions were done. So, you know, when you think about when you're hearing your children come home, and this is why I always have to say, when you're hearing other children, not just my own, that say, I think the teacher is being racist to me. And then I always ask, well, what do you mean by racism? well, you know, they're treating the other kids different than me, you know, and so these are some of the things that we're still feeling from our parents. And then they say, well, don't go to school then, because school hurt us intergenerationally. And if you're being hurt, then it's easy for us to just say, don't go to school. You know, well, and then this is where we're also seeing that dip of attendance, which is we're not striving for that excellence attendance. I remember competing, and I was never able to keep up with your sister's perfect attendance all through school. But you know, those are the things that we strive for. And now we see attendance, and we see 5 kids get near perfect attendance, and maybe not even 1 get perfect attendance, where we used to have rows and rows of kids with perfect attendance, you know. And so these are changing that thought of what school is as not a harmful place for our students, and the work ethic. It's, you know, seeing my own children struggle, you know, with work ethic. My daughter went to school to Yellowknife for a couple months. She couldn't believe how hard it was coming from school here, being a top student in her class, being a 60 student and having homework and struggling every night to try keep up, you know, on top of everything else she was dealing with emotionally, mentally, you know, and having to live in another community to try and get this, that she had to come home. And this is what our adults are doing, is they're going to Yellowknife to take a program, or outlying communities are coming into Inuvik to take a program, and they're dropping like flies after before we even hit that midterm. You know, we're seeing it, and we can go to the college and we can ask them, by midterm, how many students did you lose from September till midterm in all your programs? You know, so this is what we're seeing with, like, when they're coming out of their communities. So.
My 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, yeah, go on.
So, yeah, I mean, coming up on 25 years since I graduated high school here. Say how old I am. It's almost 25 years. One thing that has never really happened here, at least, is I've never been asked to come in and tell my story. Give an example of a student who went through the system here and then explained the pathway I took to get to where I am. I think it's intimidating for a lot of kids. You know, the internet exists now. It didn't exist when we were in high school. You didn't know anything about anything. So you're really sort of left blind. But there's a lot of kids, I think, who are interested but intimidated or unsure about what to do, like, because they don't have any family or friends who've gone to college, university. They don't have any examples to look to. Again, they don't maybe think they're good enough because they come from the small communities. So I think one thing that I've actually done in other communities when I used to travel around for work was I actually made my own little PowerPoint presentation about, like, how I went to school in the north and went off to university and what it was like, because there's just no sense of it. So in Ulahaktuk and Saxapawatuk, I used to call the school, and I happened to be there for another meeting just on my own and say, hey, can I come in and talk to your grade 11 or 12 students? And I just gave a presentation. And I've talked to the students, the teachers, and the principal here a little bit and said, hey, you know, like, I've done this other places, but in my own community, I've never actually done it here. And I think it would be a great idea for the schools to pull in the success stories that they have, because there's a lot of them in the community, and they have a lot of different pathways of how they got there. But, you know, I went to university when I was 17 years old. I was young. I was a baby. When I look at 17-year-olds now, you know, you gave the example, you were a little bit longer. There's other people who maybe graduated and, you know, went to college 5 or 6 years later, or, you know, in their 30s, but they've gone on and they've been successful. So I think showing the students these different ways that people have gotten to that end goal or where they are now would be really useful, I think, to give them a sense that there's not one way you're supposed to do. You know, there's, like, you're supposed to do it this way. You go to high school, you go to university, you graduate in 4 years, and you do this, and you get a job and get a career. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and even utilizing not always just my own experience, but the other people. Because the other thing I always tell people too, when I talk to them about my university experiences, I was the only student in my group in university, in the residence and stuff, I was the only one who finished in the same degree that I started. Every single other friend that I made and person I knew all changed programs after the first, or second, or even the third year. So again, just sort of realize to them, there's a lot of ways they can do things, and they may think they're going to the left over here, but once they actually start going, they find out, hey, I need to go right and go over here. And you know, I was supposed to do my degree in 4 years, and I took 7. So I took a bit of time off because I was struggling at one point, and I had a really hard time adjusting to living in the city. Even though I had family down south, and I used to go to, you know, Alberta, Saskatchewan every year to visit them in the summer times. When I actually moved to the city, it was really difficult to adjust to that different lifestyle, and not being able to, again, have the support systems or do the things I used to do to, you know, fix my mental situation if I was struggling. You know, up here you can walk 10 minutes in any direction and you're by yourself. So you can have those quiet moments to reflect and think about things. In the city, like Edmonton, that's really hard to find a place to sit there and be by yourself for more than 10 or 15 minutes. And that was a really hard adjustment, but I had a really good peer group around me who supported me, and I almost quit my first year. But I ended up staying. It was a good thing. I'm glad I did.
I think that's one of the things that I really, you know, like when we think of our kids having to finish K to 12 in a certain amount of time, you know, even with university, like I have people that I went to school with that took longer than I did, and they're, you know, excellent nurses, and their career is great, you know. But that's the thing I think that the Polytechnic vision needs to focus on is that there needs to be that okay mentality that it's going to take us, we might not get it, we might get there and get it done in 4 years or 2 years or however, but it's okay, and we can, you know, stretch it out if it's going to take us. The other thing is what is hard in the north is every program that we have in the Aurora College, if it's a diploma program, it runs right until June. So when you're in the Aurora College, you're behind, you don't get a job in the summer, and you only have 2 months to save up for the following school year. So you're getting 4 paychecks. Whereas if you're done in April, you get 8 paychecks. You know, you have that, you get to put your name in for all those summer jobs when all the other students are coming back from university. Because that's one of the things that I've heard is students struggle with getting jobs in the summer, and then they can't afford to, you know, and it's not that they can't afford because they get funded from, but the funding is not enough to feed the family for the rest of the year. This extra is to make up for certain things that life already has given them, like children and things like that. Even so, those are some of the things that I think that the new Polytechnic needs to realize, is that if it's a 4-year course and we're taking 6 years to do it, can we do it, and can we just run it, and then we're funded for this in the funding mind of the GNWT. If they're looking at that, then their funding pots need to coordinate with their schooling pots, their idea.
Awesome. Questions? Anybody else? Somebody had it before? Maybe? No questions? Yes.
Just when you were speaking, one of the things that it got me thinking about is, and none of you had mentioned it in your talks, all wonderful talks, by the way, thank you, but providing support for like first generation post-secondary students, because it's very difficult navigating when you don't have that parental support. If you come from a background in which your parents and your family aren't well versed in how to navigate through post-secondary, on top of all the things that you mentioned, Lisa, about having family and children, which that's an added stress, but then being in this system in which you don't know how to navigate, and it can be quite foreign to someone who's not used to that system. So I think you mentioned bringing these PowerPoint slides to communities that you've gone to, but even just like establishing support for students, like finding a mentor for them who can help them navigate, who's willing to maybe be a point of contact through email and phone calls, and just giving some of that advice. And I know some of the institutions down south are starting just programs in which they're providing support for first generation university students, because they recognize that there's like this disparity between students who have that knowledge and those that don't.
I think we can add a little bit to that even is, and I know with an ECNE they're trying to create that now, but it's our students that are going into grade 10, 11, and 12 that don't even have parents that have graduated, who can't navigate how to support them through that, because all of our kids in Inuvik could graduate with an academic diploma that could get them into pretty much any university that they want to get into in Inuvik. Not necessarily in the smaller communities if they don't have e-learning. But it's the parents, like my son would have taken foods and phys ed all through high school if he was able to just, if I wasn't on him about, no, you need to start your bio and do this and you need to do this. And the pushback that I got, but because no one else was doing that. And I'm the parent, you know, I'm the bad guy. And then when someone else tells them, you know what, I should have did this. And it's like, I did tell you that, you just didn't hear me, you know. And so those are but I know that ECNE has heard us and is trying to create, and it's not even just for the 10, 11, 12, it's actually for the 7, 8, 9 age kids to start visioning them and to what they like to do. So then they can get into, start picking their courses, so that way they have that support in moving through the academic or whichever way they want to move through. And I think that will help our younger generation. So yeah, so I think there is some work with that, which is positive. Now it's being structured in Yellowknife, so hopefully it comes out to the communities that make it a little bit cultural awareness that the parents will accept it.
If I could just add to that, so I teach at the University of Ottawa, and we have programs for first generation students, but they don't even know that they exist because they don't have the guidance to tell them to look for these programs to exist. So it's the early identification in the polytechnic process is going to be really key. Like, I'm not even saying, are you a first generation student? Because nobody knows what that means too, right? And so, yeah, just having those checks and balances in place, because we've got great programs, but nobody knows about them.
Yeah, I think at the U of A, it wasn't until about my 3rd or 4th year I learned there was a Northern Students Association, which I have to admit I never actually went and met with any of them. But they're there to support students from the North because they, you know, recognize that they struggle with just navigating the system sometimes. So they're there, and their support's there. Try to help, and it's again making sure people are aware of it and that they access it.
So when they leave the North to go to these, to move into post-secondary. But the thing is how do we support that as a polytechnic here in the NWT to provide that support for our students within the territory? So that's another.
Yes.
I'm from BDEC, by the way. So I'd like to speak to a couple of the things. Like one of the, you know, first of all, think what I want to talk to you later. I will admit, I am new to the North. I was one of these people who, my wife came up here to work for Parks Canada. I came up as a substitute teacher last year. Fell in love with it up here, and next thing you knew, as an assistant superintendent. So you can move ahead up here. There's room for promotion. One of the things, though, that I'd like to share, there are some really good things happening. For example, you're talking about the career guidance. That is a program that is coming up, and actually the last week in March, we are sending 2 career counselors from Yellowknife that are going to be going over to spend a full week in the Clavik, focusing mainly on the grade 9s, but they will also focus on students from grade 10 to 12. 2 weeks later, they're going to be spending another full week here in at East Creek, doing the same thing. This is just the beginning of the pilot. In subsequent years, these people have been hired to basically that they will work and meet with every student that's in the secondary programs, probably, I believe it's 2 to 3 times a year, and they will basically work with the students in helping them create a plan, understand what do you need. And the idea is when we were first put to us, what we sort of threw back at them, okay, good, grade 9's great. However, it's got to happen a lot. It has to happen probably grade 6, grade 7, that kids start to think, what do I really have to do? Your story was a very good one, and ditto on that. I'm also one of these people, it took me 5 years to get my grade 12. I just said I love my graduation so much, I decided to do it twice. There was 2 years in there, a lot of people don't talk about that.
Well, I had a kid, so it was a little different.
So I'm just looking that way, okay? One of the things, though, that I spent 30 years in education in Saskatchewan. One of the things that I see very positive about and things that are coming out from ECE, our language curriculum, which is strongly trying to revert the languages in the schools and bringing them back to communities. I know as human resource person with VDEC, one of my biggest struggles is finding people who can do the Indigenous language instruction in the school. We are getting people to go in and work as mentors with our Indigenous language instructors, because I have an Indigenous language instructor who's retiring this year, not resigning, retiring, because she's 75. Fortunately, I had a support assistant in the school who took it upon herself to work with her. So I will have, a transitioning program, but this is the fight we're having. What's happening not only with that, with the indigenizing of education that's happening. The language, the on the land programs, the elders in the school programs. I get to sign all the student excursion forms that go out through Beaufort Delta. I couldn't resist it. I'm going to admit to this. I was doing one the other day, and I had to stop and take a picture of it and send it to a friend of mine down in Alberta. I'm going, okay, how many student excursions would have ptarmigan hunting in Alberta? Not too many. And that is happening. There is a lot of good things happening. The points you have raised, yeah, I agree. And I need to talk to you afterwards, because you tweaked a very interesting idea. So Lesa, don't run away. Okay? But what I would like to do is, my question is, you talked about the idea of using e-learning, okay, beyond the high school, because what I see happening here with the Northern Distance Learning that started out of here, it is possible for a student coming even out of Hotıì and next year out of Polytech to come out with the credits that they can go in, and they have the same ability as a student coming out of a high school in Edmonton. So I'd like to hear some expansion on that idea. So how do we take that we can start training the teachers, the nurses, the engineers, etc. That will fill our needs.
The other thing I wanted to add to, even I guess I didn't, with the language, and we talk about culture and language, but yet we're losing. Inuit have less than 20% speakers. I don't know those stats for Gwich'in. It's less. But the ones that we do have, and where we do have them, when we have them in our schools, they're probably one of the lower paid, and yet they're the most important people in our schools. So that hierarchy of importance from one perspective, because you don't have a degree from a designated, but you have your language. That's, I never learned my language. My mother never learned her language. My grandmother never taught her kids her language because she was scolded in school. So she can speak it, and she could probably teach it because it's taught through observation in a classroom. But we're not taking those steps to make this important for like we do as Indigenous people and our culture. You know, when I was working at BDEC, you know, the one push that I always wanted to say was, we have amazing on the land people that are locals. Why are they not the instructor for on the land? Because they don't have a degree, a teaching degree. Well, the teacher that's going out with their class can relate the lesson with whatever curriculum they are. But we have an on the land instructor that's going to, that's their PhD. So they should be paid. We shouldn't have to have a certified teacher. We can have that teacher with them or an assistant with them. And so these are the things that I think when we're looking at the Polytechnic, like, why are we not creating these types of programs so that way we're building the language program? We used to have the language, you know, the Indigenous language, so that they would teach in the schools and they could teach the language. Why are we not having these types of programs where we're giving the tools to these on the land people, where they can get some instructional course where when they're working with students, and some safety courses, and some, you know, some supervising courses. And, you know, these are the things that I think that we need to build upon. And once the kids are learning their culture and they're seeing themselves in these things, like, we're not even seeing our own people on the land. So we're even depleting that. We're just the help. That's kind of the way I'm looking at it. We're hiring the help to come and do the actual. I can go on all day about that, but I'll just go there.
Good presentations. First, I'd like just to acknowledge, you know, this is the headquarters for the IRC and the GTC, as well as NECOT and Inuvik Community Corporation. Just because I wear glasses, you know, I always think about vision, and you know, like, for whatever comes out of these community consultations, and I've been at many for various issues, including social services and education and stuff like that, and usually what comes out of it, no matter how well intentioned by qualified northern consultants like you ladies, it always seems to rest at the decision of the ADM or the DM of the education, and ultimately the Minister of Education. And they all just get this, you know, the backgrounder and whatever it is in a memo or to the minister. And forgive me if I seem pessimistic, but, you know, like, I think whatever we might say, no matter how long Steve may talk, you know, I think sometimes it'll be Yellowknife that will decide. But here's my vision. You know, I worked 17 years with justice, and in various capacities: court worker, paralegal researcher, victims, you know, assistance coordinator, criminal injuries compensation. You know, worked with legal division, legislation division, and that was good training. And if only I had gone to a college type program or university type program that is quite similar, maybe perhaps, to the School of Community and Social Justice that Yukon College has. Maybe, you know, I could have started earlier, and who knows, I would have been ADM, or I would have been superintendent of BDEC, you know. But, you know, that's one vision, you know, because a lot of the people that work in justice experience injustice. It seems like, you know, government in the form of the Department of Justice is promoting careers in the jails, in corrections officers. You get the immediate training on that, but, you know, if you want to work as a community justice coordinator, there's, you know, maybe once a year, 2 or 3 day training, and that's it. And you're paid at $20 an hour, no pension, you know, none of those benefits that government employees have. So you see the cycle of people coming in, maybe working for a year, and then, getting that little experience under their belt, and next thing you know, they're GNWT employees. They leave the community, so the community now has to start the cycle again of, advertising the position, $20 an hour, and the cycle starts again. When I started in Sigachik as their justice coordinator 5 years ago, I think there might have been 7 or 8 that were working there ahead of me. And I have a feeling I may have been the longest, like 5 years working for them. So, and it's only just because I decided to move back home and look after my mother. So, a school of community and social justice that works in community development, that works in community healing, could be one aspect of this polytechnical university. We talked about Indigenous community wellness. Why not have a school of that? One of the ministers in his wisdom decided to cut social work, the social work program. And so what happens now is we have to, advertise down south. We have to hire people from down south to look after our people in our communities. I don't know where the logic is that once you become a politician, that all of a sudden it's okay to cut a program like social work and then, oh yeah, we'll hire people from down south instead. I think that more and more youth, with the advent of technology and social media, are developing skills in multimedia. Why not a school of multimedia and arts? Instead of having Miss McKenzie over here doing her story for CBC, why can't we have a Gwich'in or a Inuvik person working for CBC up here? No offense there, McKenzie. Yeah.
Go ahead.
But you've been here long though. but that's the whole, you get these young people telling their stories in all aspects, how to write for the newspaper, how to write for radio, how to write for television, how to write for podcasting, but writing their own stories. So you have something like that, so that now all of a sudden they can come into it, they go south and, they're fully informed of what's going on. We have a very progressive principal in Sigachik. It's a small community, yes, but it's a very progressive principal, and she has brought the level of these young kids to such a high standard now that, for the last 2 years at the traditional games in Yellowknife, where all schools attend, we have this little school from Sigachik, that came in 3rd last year. I think they came in 1st this year. So they're competing against schools like, from Yellowknife, Hay River, and Inuvik. And yet here little David is slaying Goliath. I find that truly amazing. And it's, whenever I see any of the teachers or the chaperones that went with these students, and the students themselves, I let them know how exactly I would feel about their progress and their achievement. So you have something like that. I think in the K to 12 area, I think more and more parents are just going to have to start doing their thing. I come from that generation that had to be in residential school, but I think in grade 12, I really wanted to escape, that environment. And ironically, the closest thing that I could think of was joining the military. I mean, how much more crazier can it be? But I just wanted to get out and go to home. And so the Armed Forces team was in town, happened to be, and I did my paper, physicals, tests, the whole works. But I was under 18 and I needed my parents' signature. So I sent it off to Arctic Red, as it was then known, to my parents, and expecting them to rejoice in my decision of joining the Army. And at that time, no highway, no internet, very few people had phones. And surprising of all things, I was called down to the visiting area at Roller Hall, and my parents were there. And after a joyous reunion, my dad sat me down and said, "You finish school and then do what you want." Well, talk about being pissed off, like, oh, here I thought he would just be really happy, but I could see the wisdom of it now. Because with him having to work on the building of the Mackenzie Highway and working up and down the Mackenzie on the boats, he could see what was coming. And I think he wanted his kids to have at least some education, grade 12, hopefully, so that they could be prepared to face the future of what's coming. And I think that's what maybe the mission or the goal of this polytechnic is, is to help, people, not only young people, but maybe, I'd like to be one of your first registrants, to go to that school or university. But I think perhaps one of the goals that you might want to consider is the words, find your voice, and help the students find their voice so that they can speak truth to power. I think that should be one of them, so that they're not just going there to become public servants, rather than to become community servants or servants to their people. Service is noble. I think I could have been a good businessman, or I could have risen in the ranks of bureaucracy to become minister, but somehow along the way, I felt that just wasn't the thing that I wanted. So hopefully with this Polytech, maybe it can be very different from U of A. Nothing against University of Saskatchewan, but that it is something for the people rather than churning out more bureaucrats. Thank you.
Oh, one more question? Yes.
I think for my vision is it might be headquartered in the I think sometimes our voices get lost in the element and we just become part of the status quo as we have been doing for many things. I mean, I think about some great initiatives such as the Mind Training Society that we sort of be missing part of that great program up here, so it's not reaching people. So in that sense, not having it headquartered as well, I know that reading the review that I think our learning centers and communities are underutilized. So how do we utilize them in this new polytechnic so that our students remain at home where they have housing, their supports around them, and take advantage of those underutilized places. Maybe there's differences in types of part-time programming that we can deliver at the community level. As well, I think a lot of our kids, like my son, who I'm struggling with in grade 10, I feel like I'm losing him, but I don't know how to help him because he's probably not going to graduate right now that it's going. But how do I give him skills from school that he's able to leave with? How can we build in the trades programming that bridges the practical hands-on at the high school level that are transferable into a polytechnic? I think that not everybody's going to graduate, but at least allow them the opportunity to give them skills so that if they want to pursue, go on to the trades or become journeypersons, at least it's an option.
I think that's a good point, and one of the things I alluded to is that I think students should have the option when they get to with discussion through grade 7, 8, 9, when they get to grade 10, to decide which direction they want to go. I was doing some research, and I believe it's in Iceland. They have maybe 4 different tracks that they can take depending on their passions and their end goals. So again, we have a curriculum, we have all these policies to abide by, but it takes people like yourself to make change. And I think that, if a student wants to get into plumbing or into carpentry, why do they have to take all of the math courses around that? Why can't they select the actual skills out of there for their selected program that they need to get into? So I think there's a lot of ways to do that, but again, it takes the will of the people. It's not easy to make changes. Any comments, Steph? Okay.
All right, thank you, everybody, for the, sorry, Jim.
He's probably going to ask when supper.
Tonight. Just a couple of things, comments first, I guess. I hear so much about our failing education system in the community, but I look in the room here tonight and look at the success stories that have come out of the education system that's here. I don't think, the blame should be all on the education system, because I think education starts at home with the parents. I think we're failing there as well. I left home, I think I was 16. I don't have a master's or a degree. I don't even have a high school diploma, but I did leave home at 16 and headed for technical training in Edmonton at Naa'ih. And I attribute my success to my parents and the values that they instilled in me, and they instilled in me the importance of education, but they also taught me to have that desire to learn, and I've spent a lifetime learning, and that's where all of my education has come from, is through experience and learning through life and life skills. So I don't feel yet our education system is a total failure. It certainly needs some improvement, and we can work on doing that, but I don't think we need to change the whole system. I think a lot of what we speak of, traditional knowledge and cultural, that also has to come from parents or from the home. I think who better is there to teach than the parents in those. I would not expect to send my children, I never expected to send them to school to learn traditional skills and stuff. I always felt that I had to teach them that myself. Right? Learning, yes, maybe. I know times are changing and there's probably opportunity for that, but I certainly don't think the education system is a total failure that I hear so much about. As far as the polytechnique, I certainly think, we certainly need to move in that direction, but it has to be, if it's going to be a northern university, it needs to be the north, right? All of the north, and not any one particular community. I think, I think, as Stephanie said, does it really need to be headquartered in any particular community? But I think Inuvik has a lot to offer. I mean, Inuvik has been the center of research for over 50 years. I mean, with the Inuvik Research Center, they were studying climate change back in the early 60s and 70s, studying ice, in the Beaufort, climate change and all of that. Back then, there was a lot of that research. that is either forgotten or has gone south with the researchers, right? And I think we need to build on what we have in the communities, and I think Inuvik is really the center of science and research, and could be on technology as well now with some of the space or the satellite tracking and stuff that we've gone on here, because I did have the opportunity to travel to Sweden and visit Kiruna, which is a community very similar to our community in a lot of ways in size. They have probably some better infrastructure and hydropower and rail link and stuff, but not a lot different than our community, but have a full-blown university there working with the community. And I think it's more, I don't know all of the details on it, but more based on technology, with space technology there. And I think there's opportunities like that for our community that would tie in well with Polytechnic or university, right? So my thoughts anyways. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you again. So